again, we would like to welcome US Representative Warren Davidson to our call today. So I'm going to hand that over to you if you'd like to give us an update as to what's going on in DC.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to talk with you all. Thanks for taking time to talk with me, to participate in the meeting, and I look forward to the Q&A. So I'll try to keep my remarks fairly brief. There is obviously a lot going on. I think a lot of the feedback I've received falls into, essentially you've probably seen floating around in the internet this Venn diagram that kind of sums it up. People that are very concerned about the public health crisis of COVID-19, people that are very concerned about civil liberties and the reaction to COVID-19, and then people that are really concerned about the economic impact. And of course, the center of the Venn diagram is me in that graphic, and I think that sums up a lot of us. It's really hard to strike the balance between all three. If you mention one, it seems like to everyone you don't care about the other two. We're going to talk a lot about what Congress has done. Fundamentally, phase 1 and 2 were mostly public health responses. Phase 3, in part of phase 2, included some stability in terms of what to do about it. Phase 2 is largely ignored because, in my opinion, it wasn't very well thought out at all. It put a new burden on small employers under 500 employees, paid FMLA, at a time when most businesses of any size are going to struggle to remain solvent. So largely that's been blown past by phase 3. And the main feature that's getting a lot of attention is the payroll protection plan, because the goal is to keep as many people as employed as possible and keep as many of the businesses as possible solvent through this tough time. So that program went live last Friday. So 2 weeks ago, it was passed into law and signed by the president. And Treasury wrote the rules, pushed it out to banks, and got it rolling last Friday. Companies could sign up. There is some concern that it isn't even working. I'm sure some of you are waiting and probably, given the feedback I've had various versions of the truth shared to you by multiple banks if it didn't go smoothly with your initial effort. I can assure you that there are some, including small banks in the district, that weren't actively enrolled in the program who successfully enrolled and have approved their customers and have distributed cash. Some of the banks have said they're going to wait until the Fed puts cash in their account before they distribute cash. That's, I don't think, the intent of the program. But then again, some of the banks have modified the rules that were already somewhat modified by Treasury. So I'm sure we'll get some of those questions. The other big things that have been included in the effort are large expansion of unemployment insurance, and that, I think, has been rate limited. If you look at the last 2 weeks, you've essentially had 6 million people file for unemployment, and I think that might be the level of capacity the system has, more than the total number of people that have been displaced, which is not great news. But so we're over 20 million unemployed already, and I don't see a ton of slowing in that momentum, frankly. So the other piece that's unique is unemployment insurance didn't include contractors and self-employed people, and now it does. Unfortunately, in most states, including Ohio, the unemployment insurance program wasn't designed to accept those people. This week, Lieutenant Governor Husted mentioned that Ohio wouldn't have that functional until mid-May. So essentially, you're looking at 2 months without revenue for some self-employed or 1099 people. So they were effectively ordered closed. And then they will be retroactively paid, but that's a lot to bridge for a lot of folks. It's tough times. I'll mention there are 3 ways that 1099 folks can apply for some stability. One is through the unemployment insurance expansion. 2 is they can be claimed by statute, not always by all banks, but by statute they can be claimed on an employer's payroll account. And so, in theory, if a contractor had several employers that accounted for their book of business and all applied and distributed the funds to them, then they would be made whole. And then to the degree that wasn't true, they could say, well, this is still better than filing for unemployment insurance. And then lastly, self-employed 1099 contractors can apply for the program themselves. That hasn't gone very well so far, but it is the intent that the program would be able to do that. So 3 layers, no double dipping or triple dipping. And so the main safeguard against this program that was launched hastily is banks knowing their customers and self-certification subject to, frankly, bank fraud charges. So that's the second big thing. And then the third thing is this economic stability fund, a $500 billion fund. Altogether, that fund is creating backstops for some of the efforts the Federal Reserve is doing. While there are about $50 billion that's heavily focused on airline, air cargo, and national security concerns in the form of grants, overwhelmingly that fund is meant to be backstops, federal guarantees to get lending moving in an era where there isn't really a buy side for debt. There isn't a lot of lending. So the Federal Reserve's been a bridge for that. This week they launched the Main Street lending facility, which for employers under 10,000 is not a grant program, it's a loan program. Banks in that program are required to hold 5% on their own balance sheets, so it truly has real underwriting on it. But essentially, going concerns can borrow against good collateral, with generous terms and, frankly, some forbearance on your leverage ratios and everything else, and for the banks. So really, as a whole country, we're levering up or borrowing more money, going deeper into debt. And that's a lot of the premise. The way to get through this is to spend money, to borrow money, and it presumes there are lenders. The reality is there isn't enough lending capacity in the country right now to do that, and the Federal Reserve is bridging that by printing money, basically, and putting it on their balance sheet. So a lot of concerns people might raise about that. I'd say last, even municipal bonds were affected. We had a community and a county in the district that I know of so far that had to pull offerings due to this, and there's just no buy side for debt, even stable revenue in Western Ohio anyway, and maybe not some cities, for municipal bonds. So the Fed has created that fund as well. There isn't really a business sector that hasn't been affected by this, and I'm sure it's shocking for everyone. It's a lot to deal with, and with that, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Warren. I had some questions that business owners sent in ahead of time. So the first one is from a small business owner. She said, I was originally told I would receive access to an emergency $10,000 within 72 hours as I put my EIDL application in. Now I learned that I am actually only able to receive $3,000. I still have no idea when all these funds will come in. My business has already lost $8,000 as a result of being closed. When will I actually receive any kind of assistance?
So yeah, the economic injury disaster loan program is really a grant, and that is supposed to be turned around swiftly. Unfortunately, it hasn't gone as fast as we had hoped for. It is an SBA product. My own personal experience with the SBA has not been great. A lot of us were concerned about using the SBA, and that's why PPP really is a Treasury product, but because it was also hooked into SBA. Unfortunately, SBA has slowed up even PPP by essentially doubly interjecting with Treasury. A lot of that is getting fixed, but along the way, they had massively more demand for EIDL grants than they could supply. And so they had to make it based on your number of employees. So the max would be 10,000, but then it's scaled down based on that. Those first dollars are supposed to be cut today, and then I imagine over the course of about a week, those funds will flow out. But as I say, there are some companies who applied for that, right away when they first could, and they're still waiting on money. And the whole point was they could get that faster than Congress at that point hadn't even passed the CARES Act. So that's how long some companies have waited in the queue for this. So there's not a great excuse for it. So say the amount of demand for it, greatly exceeds the total supply. They had to find a way to balance the priorities. And if you don't start seeing funds soon, and you have been approved, and you're supposed to get the funds, please reach out to our office. And a lot of you already have made contact with Ben, but our office is working, and a lot of the cases we are dealing with are SBA related.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of frustration with the SBA right now. So the next question is a little lengthy. Both the federal government and the state government have put a freeze on evictions. While this sounds like unicorns and rainbows, it puts a huge burden on landlords. Our expenses continue, but our income stops. Worse yet, since some of our bills, such as water bills, also default to the landlord when not paid, we're also getting saddled with those additional expenses. The result is that landlords are paying way more than their share, and they're helpless to evict a deadbeat tenant who is having his rent and utilities paid by his landlord for months. Given how long the normal eviction time takes, and this government encouraged non-payment of rent, and the courts will back that up much longer than normal, I'm expecting tenants will have 6 to 9 months of free rent and free utilities before they can finally be removed from the property. Collection efforts against this group of people are usually fruitless, as you can't get blood from a turnip, so landlords will most likely never collect back rents and utilities. This has been an eminent domain taking, but without compensation. Since the government took away our rights to our own properties, what compensation is the government going to provide to landlords?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. So, and frankly, a sentiment that a lot of people share, that while it's not truly the same as eminent domain where it's gone permanently, the government plans to reopen. For some companies that don't survive the liquidity crunch here, it's effectively they took the whole thing, right? I mean, so I'm confident that's going to be litigated. We looked into it, and when there was, a pandemic at the turn of the century with Spanish flu, the courts, frankly, didn't support that argument fully. I think there's some cases that you'll have to see a support for it because I was talking to one company who literally was told to close. The customers obviously told not to go there, and for a double measure, they put a physical barrier at the entrance to the property. So the business literally is prohibited from operating. So what are you supposed to do? And in the meantime, you still have debt service obligations as a landlord. So this is a really big issue, and if you scale it up from the smallest scale, somebody with a few houses that they rent out or an apartment complex that they rent out, all the way up to the biggest real estate investment trusts, because of the problems in the way the securities are structured, it's been much more complicated to service some of this market. So I literally am awaiting a call back from the Treasury Secretary to reconcile that. We've got a lot of cash going out, so a lot of the programs, including the payroll protection plan, presume that the borrower can use a portion of the funds to pay rent, leases, utilities, but yet the forbearance is being told to take place. And that even where there's not a clear command or directive to grant the forbearance, the net effect is lots of people won't pay it, so there'll be defaults. And what we don't want is a ton of foreclosures and defaults on the owners of these properties. And when you flow it up to the most complex products, the commercial mortgage-backed securities, they become very zero-sum very quickly. And there are some parties to those agreements that are essentially betting on default, or they have a favored position. So the government really does need to act here and provide a commercial tenant debt facility at some level so that commercial tenants can bridge the gap and not go into default, or some sort of forbearance with the industry for the servicing of those obligations. I think the other part where communities have a big interest is they don't want to see vacancies or evictions or bankruptcies either, and they are counting on the rental stuff coming in so that they can collect some modicum of tax revenue, right? So property taxes don't get paid on vacant buildings generally, or when there's no revenue coming in, some people go into default or delinquency on property taxes. So it is a huge area of concern for economic stability. Commercial real estate in the U.S. is about $16 trillion, and it's a huge problem for the whole economy because a lot of the businesses are tenants. They don't own their own facilities. They lease, and then in apartment rents, and already in the month of April, the initial data says that roughly a third of apartment renters did not pay their rent on time this month. So really rough data. We do have to solve something with respect to tenants and property management. And I do know that Treasury is working on how to deal with that. I know the Federal Reserve is as well. And as a member of the Financial Services Committee, this is one of the policy areas that I've been personally more involved in than most. So I don't have an easy answer for you yet, but I can tell you that there's a work in process on it. And I recognize the inherent tension between giving everybody the cash and even making it an eligible payment, but then on the other side saying we're going to defer it and delay it. So it doesn't do a lot for landlords right now, building owners, property managers.
Thank you. The next question is, why were 501c6s, an example would be a Chamber of Commerce, or a 501c4, example would be a Visitors Bureau, organizations left out of the Paycheck Protection Program? And is there a chance that they will be included in the next phase of funding?
Yeah, I think there's a goal to get these groups included. Personally, I think it was part of a negotiation to limit the range of nonprofits and the range of entities that were eligible because Democrats had initially had language in the text that would have made abortion clinics eligible for funding. That's not something that's going to move readily through a Republican-controlled Senate or be signed by a Republican president. And frankly, it's hard to say is a high priority under COVID-19 responses. But when you look at visitors bureaus and chambers of commerce, this is, directly related to keeping our economy stable and growing. You look at the work that the Troy Chamber is doing here to kind of bridge and connect. I think people see that it's core, but I do believe that it was somewhat of a retaliatory piece of the negotiation from what I've heard. Beyond that, I don't think it was an oversight, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. It's kind of what I've heard too. We'd appreciate support in the next phase. Another question is an issue that businesses are having are how to balance and prioritize the different plans, and then how do they determine what's best to tell their employers and contractors what to do. I think that, we have the unemployment that was increased, but then we're also doing the Paycheck Protection Program. So I think businesses are really struggling with what to prioritize and what to do from the business perspective, but also to take care of their employees. Any comments?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think there's no one right answer. Inherently, I think the government has signaled that, hey, we would love to keep everybody working and on payroll as much as possible. There's two reasons. One is we want the economy to restart more quickly. So if everybody's already used to working in the same place, that would be great. And then two, just structurally, it's less disruptive for employees and families. They keep the same system, they keep the same benefits and everything else, and look at the lags that are happening on unemployment. So it's inherently better for individuals and families, it's better for businesses, it's better for starting up the economy. So that's why you have this new program. But there are a lot of people that work at places that are bigger than 500 employees. Fundamentally, they tried to limit the range of grants, and they look at, well, once you're above 500 employees, for a lot of companies in that space, they can at least borrow money against good collateral instead of being granted money. And that's the purpose of that Main Street lending facility. Nevertheless, because some of the benefits have been made more generous than normal, there are people at the low wage scale that will make more money on unemployment than they were making in their wages. Part of that is on purpose initially, was to say, well, you do need to pay people a little more because COBRA, so, when someone's, laid off or furloughed, if they have to pick up their health insurance, that's a big out-of-pocket expense for a lot of people, and a lot of people drop their health insurance because they can't really afford the COBRA payment for their health insurance. But nevertheless, even after that, there are people that will probably still make more. And that's a big moral hazard that we really never recovered from in the global financial crisis. So when you look at, 08, 09, we had about 67% of the workforce participate, 67% of the people, working age people participating in the workforce. And it went down, while unemployment overall during the Obama years went down, so did workforce participation. It went down from 67% down to about 62%. And then under the previous 3 years, it steadily started moving up as the economy was growing and as unemployment was going down even further to a low of 3.5%. We got workforce participation only up to 63.5%. So you still never really fully recovered. If you look at the impact right now, workforce participation is just getting decimated, and getting people back into the workforce has been, a Herculean effort. And most of the employers, if you go back just a few months, when I would come and meet with most everybody, they would say, well, we would grow even faster if we could just get the right workforce. So that's the intersection of the challenge, and part of the reason that there was the payroll protection plan and the Main Street lending facility is to keep that workforce engaged. But some companies are going to look at the risks to their own liquidity, their own solvency, the amount of debt that they're taking on, and still say, boy, I don't know if I can take that risk. I don't know if I can service that much debt. If there's a chance that I don't make it, then this turns into a loan, and it's not a grant. It's not forgiven. And I just think you really got to take a hard look. And for a lot of smaller businesses, that's going to be particularly hard because you don't have the cash flow and you don't have the financial staff to help with that. So. I've talked to a guy who's got a business that's like CFOs for hire, and they're slammed because some people have like a bookkeeper on staff, but they're looking to accountants. Accountants are all kind of different in their responses and availability. Taxes at least are deferred till July. So while they would be in their peak busyness right now, they're at least in theory available, but that takes cash as well. So. I think it's a complex problem for businesses of any size or scale in terms of how to respond to it. So there are a range of products. We're trying to do a good job communicating them. And if you guys want to schedule a subsequent follow-up with me or our staff, or we're going to have an event next week with some SBA participants on to kind of explain the logic of how some of the programs are working, what are some of the issues with them. But so we're trying to provide education on them, but some of them do get complex once you start applying them to your specific business and your specific numbers. As a guy that owned businesses here in Troy with a fair number of employees, I can appreciate how hard some of those decisions will be, and certainly were in 08, 09 when we were going through the last big one.
Thank you. You addressed part of this already, but again, a small business owner concerned about the fact that the way it was put to the public was that it would be a $10,000 advance grant. And again, the three days they would be able to receive it. Now they've been told it's capped at $1,000 per employee. Again, not seeing any of the local business owners here that have received any funds, but now learning that what originally was told to be a $2 million max is going to be capped at $15,000 per small business owner. So the small business owners are growing increasingly confused and desperate with little or no communication from the SBA, and feeling like Congress has gone back on what the CARES Act actually promised. So how would you address that?
Yeah, so this is again specific to EIDL, EIDL, and fundamentally Congress either didn't appropriate enough money or didn't accurately lay it out. I mean, so I think at the beginning of it, Congress appropriated $10 billion. $10 billion essentially wasn't enough to honor the cap, and so when SBA looked at it, they said, okay, well, we can't meet all this demand with that much money, so we're either going to deny people or we're going to ration it, or we're going to max it at a cap, and that's what they came up with is 1,000 per employee, and it caps at 15. That whole process, I mean, frankly, most anybody that's ever dealt with the SBA would say, yeah, there's no way they're turning this around in 3 days, and if nothing else, hopefully we get a more efficient way to do SBA-style loans and just let the banks do them, and either save money by massively streamlining the SBA, or the SBA goes, wow, okay, we got a crisis response program, and now we know how to operate in real time. But either outcome would be good, but unfortunately, it's not good right now. So like I said, the cash is supposed to start going out on idle payments today, but it is capped. And so if you only applied for idle and thought, well, I've applied for $1 million and we're good, that's going to be tough, because you're going to essentially say, oh, well, okay, I have to now apply for PPP, payroll protection plan. That facility's open, and frankly, banks are still in the process of lending traditional lending against good collateral. They've all gotten guidance from federal regulators to on their leverage ratios and everything else. So for proven businesses, if you've got a good relationship with your lender, they're going to be scared about lending money as well, but they definitely have more flexibility than they've had since Dodd-Frank went into effect to lend money, but again, against good collateral. Net of these programs. And that's where the federal backstop or the federal funding is so important.
Thank you. This one also is a little lengthy. It is clear to many in our state that we need more business-minded people in elected office more than ever. The current situation is a huge tipping point to that. And I think that many in Western Ohio are growing exceedingly frustrated with the government overreach in the private sector. You are one of the very few that have a long history of private sector employment, and I would think that you share some of those sentiments. Can you provide any detail to what our exit plan is with this epidemic, given the current capacity, supplies, and significant decrease in numbers?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the recognition. That's a big part of why I wanted to actually run for office in the first place. So, well said. And as I said at the beginning, look, I want to take the public health crisis seriously as well, but I also don't want to ignore the civil liberties front. The idea that effectively the government's going to close your whole economy, all on executive authority, frankly. I mean, there's very little that the legislatures at the federal, state, or local level have done. It's almost all have been executive authority, which should give everyone pause, because when freedom's lost, it goes back to John Adams and just history, when freedom's lost, it's rarely reclaimed. And I've been pointing out to a lot of people that the Patriot Act, which was passed right after 9/11, which effectively allowed warrantless surveillance of American citizens, but, to keep us safe. Well, it had an expiration date. It was only supposed to be temporary, but that hasn't really been clawed back. It hasn't even been substantially restrained by the Supreme Court. And on its face, it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. So you got to be careful about those process. Process does matter. And I'll say the other factor is, executive leadership's lonely.
I mean, a lot of you all on the call lead businesses, and when you're making tough calls, it's nice to have some people around you. And I think if the legislature weighs in and agrees with our governor or president or whatever, it's good to have some company. And on the other side, it's good to have some accountability. So I'm always reluctant to share my conversations, whether they're with the governor, with the president, with other executive people. But I think it's important for people to know that I have consistently, on the calls I've had, pushed for an exit strategy. So as a military guy, you always want to have a mission statement to say, hey, what's the mission? We want to fight and win the war. But I think, General Powell always had a good frame of mind on this that is lost in actual war fighting, notably in Afghanistan. But it's like, hey, we better have an exit strategy. What's our path to leave? How do we exit from this? And this COVID-19 war that we're in has to have an exit strategy. I will tell you, post some of my conversations, the governor has launched a team that was originally larger businesses that Matt Finkus from Piqua, Piqua football player, played at Ohio State, a little bit of time in the NFL, started pushing the governor. He got a concession to create a small business version of that too, and get some of the open the economy up piece. This is a hotly debated topic. As I say, you push on any one part of that triangle, the other two sides say you don't care about their side of the issue. The president dipped his toes into the water a little bit. The governor this week, and a couple times, has actually mentioned it, the idea that he created this task force and so on and so forth. I've talked with folks in our legislature, and they have started spinning up their own committees to talk about opening our economy up. But there's some frankly scary ideas. Talk about civil liberties and exit. That go to the idea that we're going to track you. You're going to have an ID that shows that you're either COVID immune or whatever, to go back to work or to go in public, to be in public without a mask or whatever. I think one of the most important things Congress does is kill bad ideas. They kill lots of good ones in the process, frankly, but I am in the process of pushing my multiple attempts. I don't think Congress should have ever adjourned personally, so I've made that point since March 13th. I think even if we were the only members in our own offices and our staffs worked remotely, I think we should be there. That's our duty station. I mean, my first general order as a private was, I will guard my post and everything within the limits of my post until properly relieved. And I think we need to be on duty right now. Not that we're not having dialogue remotely, but it is different when you convene and when you have the formal piece. And the idea that we've got people that feed us, that keep us healthy, that keep us safe, that are going to work every day, and Congress is debating all these things and can't convene with the formality of the office safely, sends a message, and I think it sends the wrong message. I think we need to be leading by example. We need to be operating safely, and that shows the way for an exit strategy. And to me, okay, you might have to work differently. You might have to keep your space a little bit. I've talked with a few folks in terms of how is Kroger pulling off what they're doing. I mean, they haven't had a zero incidents, but they've had a very good track record of keeping people healthy. They've kept us all fed that use their service or any of the competitors. It's not an endorsement for Kroger, but as a way to illustrate a company everybody recognizes. They've operated, and they're not a healthcare facility. They're not donning everyone in all kinds of gear to do it. They've managed to operate. So, and I think Congress needs to do that. Last thing I'll say is the healthcare facilities that I've talked to. You've got essentially everything that can be avoided being avoided right now. Everything that's elective doesn't mean it's like cosmetic surgery. I mean, elective is I need to go get this pain diagnosed, and it might be cancer. And so delaying that or deferring that for a month or two, that's consequential. people are doing that. They're doing that with heart conditions. They're doing that with surgeries. And I talked with one of the hospitals that do 70 surgeries a day. They're down some days 0. The peak they've had so far is 4. So the facilities can't stay in business that way. The other side is, presumably, all of this healthcare that was going on that was normally one of the biggest topics of debate, it can't be deferred forever. These guys have to find a way to get back to work and take care of the health of people. And that's not to say, hey, we're not sensitive to the other part of the hospital that has to fight the battle against, this virus. So when I talk to them, they talk about everyone coming into the facility wears a mask. Not that that'll inherently prevent you from getting the virus, but if you're asymptomatic, you have a mask over your face, it'll prevent you from spreading it. To me, that's far less invasive than some of the tracking mechanisms that I've seen or registries, that national registries that some have advocated for. But that'll be, even if that's the one thing that's different, that'll be way different for a lot of people. So I think we'll initially come back and people will be scaled down in terms of who can go back to work, probably younger people that are no underlying health conditions with some accommodations like physical space separation and some protocols for, when to stay home and all that. But I think that that's going to start happening soon. I really believe that within a month it needs to start happening unless somehow there's a massive reversal of data. And, as General Mattis said, sorry for the long answer, by the way, but as General Mattis said, the enemy gets a vote, not literal vote, but you're fighting an enemy, and they don't usually hold still and let you take them out. This virus is that way too. I mean, so Singapore, as an example, thought they had evaded this without substantial damage to their own economy, and then they started opening back up, and they had a resurgence of the virus. For America, that would be just huge. So there are also, lastly, parts of the country where this is less of an issue than others. And even in our area, Miami County is more of a hot spot than most of the other areas around us. So we can isolate that some and say where, why, how. But I think you're going to start seeing some of that start to be rolled out. And my hope is we can do that in a way that stays in the center of the Venn diagram. Take the virus seriously, take the civil liberties seriously, and let's get the economy back open and functioning. As many people as safely as possible, as soon as possible, back to work.
Thank you. The next question is, can farmers get any loans that can be forgiven?
Great question. And I had a call yesterday with Sonny Perdue, not a personal one, but a group with the GOP conference talking with Sonny Perdue, the Secretary of Agriculture. And they are in the process of rolling out plans. They are eligible for PPP funds, but for a lot of ag, that's not the major expense. And frankly, for some, initially where they didn't want to allow coverage of contractors, it didn't even cover a significant chunk. So there are 2 programs in ag, and if I can, I'll just turn to Ben. If you can give Ben a microphone for a second, he can explain some detail around the present state of the ag's two existing programs. And if you saw the president tweet last night or this morning, he was tweeting, and I don't know how many people tweet. I didn't before I got this job. But the president's Twitter feed's closely watched. He made promises to farmers to get programs out to them. So I think there's a clear recognition that what we have right now isn't sufficient. But Ben will give you a quick summary of what is there.
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
So next week we should be receiving more details, which we'll be sending along as soon as they're available to us. But under the CARES Act, there are 2 pots of funding here, a $9.5 billion emergency funding, which will be available to farmers from what we can tell within the next few weeks as soon as this is rolled out. and then an additional $14 billion, which will be provided through the USDA's Commodity Credit Corp, which is the same entity that has been administering the market facilitation program over the last 2 years, which was basically the trade assistance that farmers have been eligible to receive. So 2 pots of funding, a total of about $23.5 billion. Secretary Perdue has said that, the totality of the funding should be available by early summer, but we're hoping to be able to provide more details of the application process to producers, hopefully within the next few weeks.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Ben.
We have a question from a small business owner. Tuesday, I was called by the health department about a complaint because I was performing a service that is not allowed, performing a service delivering flowers that is being allowed in neighboring counties, but now is not allowed in Miami County. But now we have delivery vans coming from outside the county doing the same service. What would you recommend that this business owner do to try to address this?
Yeah, I'd say locally, talk to the commissioners at the county level. I mean, in theory, the public health people are actually accountable to the executive branch, county commissioners at the county level, governors at the state level. I'm sure that'll be litigated at the state level regarding the election, but there is a inconsistency there, and Montgomery County, as an example, has done some aggressive things that I've heard about, and we've had some businesses that operate in both counties. And as an example, we had early on lawn care businesses that were being safe and going out with one person in a truck, a trailer with a mower on it, and just mowing grass and weed eating, load back up the mower and either go to the next house. They're pretty socially distant. They're clearly outside. They're following all the guidelines you could reasonably follow, and I would think most rational people would say they're posing no health risk. But some counties were doing that, and I think we got the governor's office to weigh in and say, yeah, okay, those can do it. Because again, the debate is the goal to close as many businesses as possible, to halt as much economic activity as possible, and frankly, for some people and in some areas, that seems to be the goal. But I think Governor DeWine has attempted to strike the balance to say, look, we want to follow the protocols, we want as many people as we can to stay home for sure, but the goal is, can this accommodation be made? And it seems that there would be, if there's a way to deliver an Amazon package of artificial flowers to your door, there would be a way to deliver a bouquet of flowers or whatever other product is at the local flower shop there. And I'd say lastly, people can go into grocery stores. This is one of the tensions I have about the government deciding essential versus non-essential businesses. You could go into Walmart and buy, or Kroger, or Meijer, or any other places around town and buy some flowers because they're open for groceries, but they can sell flowers. Or you got a flower shop, they can't come in and buy your flowers, and now you can't even deliver. If you got a local bike shop, which we got one downtown in Troy, well, you're not supposed to operate, you're not an essential business, but you can go buy bikes at Kroger or at Walmart. And so I think this is one of the real challenges for our Main Street businesses, and it highlights that we need to be standards-based instead of the government deciding what's essential or non-essential. I lost that debate a long time ago, but to me, that's the way that we should be going about it. It should be a set of objective standards and say this is how we keep as much of the economy as possible working, and you keep as many people as possible, as safe as possible. But it should be about applying standards. And I mean, to me, the flower shop seems like there would be a way to work out something with the health commissioner that's accommodative. Even the golf courses found a way to work something out for that. So I think, what would cheer up a lot of people better? I hear chocolates do. There's a lot of people eating, but I'm sure flowers would continue to do the trick as well.
Yeah, I know you're on the phone, so you cannot see her giving the thumbs up and shaking her head as you're speaking. So I know she appreciated your answer. The next question, the next question, again from a small business owner, a policy question. As a juice bar owner, she would like to be able to adapt to the changing market by shipping the raw juice outside of Ohio via an overnight carrier. That is currently not allowed in Ohio. However, other states do allow this. Who would she start the conversation with to advocate to adjust the policy so that her business can adapt and survive in this challenging environment?
Yeah, I'd ask if you could just connect her to Ben in our office. I mean, if there's a federal nexus there, there's an issue there where, you know, some states have been able to, in this environment, be able to sell, you know, meat and raw milk, not homogenized, not pasteurized, all that stuff, raw milk and just locally processed beef without an FDA, USDA inspector on site. Wyoming had the waiver for the meat processing, and I think a couple states had waivers for milk. But shipping it across state lines somehow triggers federal issues. And, you know, interstate commerce becomes a play there. So we can try to help you wade through, you know, what it is as it relates to juice. You know, hopefully there's a way that we can be helpful, but we'll dig into it and see what we can do.
Thank you. I'll definitely connect her after the call. I have a question from someone who is a 1099 independent contractor. When it was first announced that they would be eligible for unemployment, she applied for unemployment and then heard yesterday that the program is not actually available till May. Should she cancel her current claim or should she just wait? She's concerned that she's done something wrong or fraudulent.
Yeah, no, there's nothing fraudulent about it. I mean, in statute, people are eligible for it, so it's clearly not fraudulent. There are people who had their claims denied initially, and my fear is that some of those people will feel like, oh, well, my claim was denied, and they don't know to come back. So we're trying to get public service information out about all the range of things that we could do. But this is one where, you know, if you had an initial unemployment claim denied or still haven't even heard an answer back, the reality is for self-employed 1099 people, one of the ways that you're now eligible to bridge your income is unemployment. Now, structurally, who knows whether that survives. It may be one of those things that's hard to turn off once it's turned on, but it's on. The problem is Ohio's software didn't, and many states didn't have that functionality, and so they've had to essentially try to rewrite the unemployment insurance software to be able to accommodate it. And the Lieutenant Governor did promise mid-May as a delivery date, and you know it's effectively 2 months with no income for people. So there got to be a lot of people hurting because of that. But yeah, I would just keep looking for the state's site to go live. We will certainly publish it once we know that it's live. And then once we know it's live, it's a government product, so I'm not positive it will work perfectly. But they may take their time to get it right, and you know, I hope it works perfectly once they turn it on. And New Jersey, as an example, they were recruiting COBOL engineers because their system was written, you know, back when COBOL was the programming language in like the 70s or something, maybe early 80s. But so pretty old programming language to just try to bridge some of their software. I'm not sure specifically what language ours is written in, but I know it wasn't written to accommodate, you know, 1099 and self-employed people. So sorry for the present situation, and if folks can relay that information to know that, hey, you're not doing anything wrong. It is the intent to offer it. And even if you were denied before, you're still eligible. So you may have to reapply.
Thank you. Along the same lines, I know that this is kind of a state issue, but one of the questions is there a good way to find out what actually the current wait time is or where somebody's claim is in the system? It seems like that seems to be an issue for a lot of people who've applied also.
Yeah, I think that's a common request. I think the state's working on providing that as one of their dashboards. And what I do know is even on the call center, so one, the websites are, so there's a backlog even for traditional people who are unemployed getting their claims processed. So, let's say, you were a full-time waiter and your restaurant was closed and you don't have carry-out, so you're laid off. Then you've been eligible for now 2 weeks. There are still people that are in the queue, maybe not for 2 weeks, but for a while trying to get it through. And by statute, instead of there being an initial 2-week waiting period, part of the logic of that is the employer gets a chance to appeal and say, no, this person wasn't laid off, they quit. That's different, or this person was terminated for cause, and here's all the 2 years of 200 pages of disciplinary actions we went through. And occasionally an employer can win that, pretty much never. But usually there's that buffer. Here the goal was for them to be enrolled within a week. States have had a hard time accommodating that because they got flooded so bigly. I think the communication at the state level, they're trying to push out the information. So they're adding capacity on the server capacity. They more than doubled that, and then they expanded the hours from normal operating hours. They added more people to the call center, and now they're 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on the call center. So the site's open 24/7, but the phone line is open in 12 hours a day, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And the Lieutenant Governor, when we've had conference calls, he's tried to emphasize the work they're doing there. But we will certainly reiterate the need to get a better dashboard on the website, expected wait times, or once you submit a claim, if that can be part of the feedback loop.
Thank you. I think that is all of the questions we have. Do you have any final words, Warren?
No, look, it's an honor to be representing our district. It's been a very interesting, closing in on 4 years since I did this. So pretty interesting, flown by. Pretty interesting 4 years in American history now, not just American politics. But it's pretty cool to get a chance to serve our district, and I love the interaction and feedback. I miss being around people in face-to-face scenarios. I look forward to that continuing again soon. We're all going to get through this. We're all going to be changed in some ways, and I hope all you folks out there keep as many people working as possible, keep all your businesses solvent and back on a good path to growth. And if there's any way that our office can help with anything, we're still open for business, though working remotely almost exclusively. We are happy with accommodations to come and meet with folks, as we start working through this. We had initially been doing that, and then that got totally parked, and now we're talking about how do we open that part back up for our district as well, as some people required. So we're not pushing it. We're happy to accommodate, but anyway, and thanks to the Troy Chamber for being here and convening this group of folks. So I appreciate you all, and hope you have a blessed Easter weekend.
Thank you, Warren. We really appreciate your time.